no way, Leo said. We've been sitting in a cave and you get the luxury tent? Somebody give me hypothermia. I want hot chocolate and a parka. Rick Riordan.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses. We're talking about being cold today, and I couldn't resist a quote about hot chocolate.
Specifically, we're going to be talking about hypothermia, what it does to the body, other things that can result in you dying by hypothermia that you may not have considered before.
The definition of hypothermia is when the internal body temperature drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. This happens from some reason or other, the body losing heat faster than it can produce it.
And I think most of the time when you think about hypothermia, you will think about the external hypothermia. One of my oldest fears was getting stuck in the ice chasms of glaciers. I read it in a book once and it forever haunted me. No matter how bundled you are, you're eventually going to run out of heat and die.
And in the last, I would say, 150 years, we've had way more explorers die from cold and cold exposure than we, I would guess, ever have from like monster attacks and the jungle cats and these kinds of things that we think about explorers seeing as dangers. But hypothermia, especially as we've gone to the edges of the world in the north and south, has really been very scary for a lot of the most intrepid people out there.
For the less intrepid of us, we're more likely to get hypothermia being exposed to really cold water. This happens a lot during the beginning of summer, the end of spring, where the snow is starting to melt, making waters and rivers and stuff like that very cold. But the external air is getting warm, so people are wanting to get in the water more often. You can also, surprisingly, get hypothermia just from sweating. The purpose of sweat is to cool your body down. So while you may be warming up and sweating because you're active, that water on your skin from the sweat is leaching the heat from your body itself. And when the wind picks up, it accelerates that process, which can end in hypothermia.
And then one that's more often associated with especially the very young or the very old would be sleeping in a very cold environment. So if the windows are left open or if they are rationing their heat, that kind of thing, and then they just go to sleep. When you sleep, your heart rate can drop, and therefore you're not pumping blood to keep yourself warm at quite the same rate. And that can be very dangerous for people on either end of the age spectrum.
Now, it's not always external things that cause hypothermia. Your body can betray you and cause hypothermia as well. This basically happens when the body isn't pumping enough blood, causing enough heat and energy burning to actually keep the person warm.
This one often happens side by side with the external. These things that we're about to talk about put you at a much higher risk. One of the things that they talk about is making sure that you're eating and drinking enough. If you're trying to sleep off the hunger, that kind of thing, hypothermia can threaten you a lot more.
You can also get hypothermia from being very tired. Your body does weird things when it's exhausted. And one of those things that it does is generally try to pull all of the less important functions and run those on the bare minimum while focusing blood flow and energy onto core pieces of your body. I've actually not gotten to hypothermia points, but I have noticed when I get really tired, I get more cold. A lot of all-nighters in college ended with me wrapped up in a blanket.
Yeah, don't do that to yourself. Not a great plan. Some of the other things that can contribute to hypothermia would be the use of illicit substances, chronic illnesses, another thing that just your body isn't functioning 100% the way it should. Some studies have shown that schizophrenics are a lot higher risk for hypothermia.
Now, here's the interesting, probably unexpected unless you listen to our bonus episode. One thing that can cause hypothermia before it kills you is flaying someone. By removing the skin, it can cause hypothermia before bleeding out, because the skin is what normally helps you retain most of your heat.
All of this is assuming that the person who skinned you alive is actually really good at their job, and they did not nick an artery or damage some other organs, that kind of thing.
So in your story, if you have a character who is very skilled, very practiced at this sort of thing, they could accomplish it.
When it comes to the symptoms of hypothermia, they can be a combination of different things. Not only how cold your internal temperature is, but the duration can affect different things differently. We are breaking it down into mild, moderate, and severe.
Mild symptoms are going to be fairly recognizable, things that you have either experienced or seen. In many ways, the shivering, the teeth chattering is the attempt of the body to create heat with those small movements that are uncontrollable. You'll also end up having clumsiness and, of course, numbness, especially in your extremities, because your body is trying to preserve and protect the core organs, not your fingertips.
When it comes to the more moderate symptoms, I feel like these are the things that we know to write about. That's the brain fog and the skin turning very pale or very blue. And in a medical sense, they've got low blood pressure and probably their heart's beating arrhythmically.
Now, for the severe symptoms, this is when your body temperature drops below 82 degrees. This is when the shivering stops. And if you've hit this stage, or if a character has hit this stage, it is very, very dangerous and very likely that it will end in death because the body has really shut down its emergency protocols.
One of the last-ditch efforts that the body will do is it will open up and dilate all of the blood vessels in order to just keep the blood flowing as much as possible. This does a very weird thing to your head and makes you think that you're warm. All of a sudden, you'll feel like this warmth washes over you, you're feeling much better, and so you might even take off a jacket or, go barefoot in the snow for a little bit. These kinds of things, because you feel like you're warm. This is a very bad sign that you are actually very far down that path.
And this is where the brain fog really creates a problem because you aren't going to be thinking clearly enough to realize that it's your body kind of playing tricks on your mind. In the long term, for this severe level of hypothermia, you will likely end up with frostbite or gangrene. The frostbite is going to affect extremities first. This is why a lot of people who have been exposed to the elements will have to have fingertips or toes removed first. Basically, the body pulled all of the blood out of that area, and the cells all in that area have completely died.
In every episode so far, we've talked about the personality of the killer. Someone who would have a certain mentality in order to use this to kill a victim. Regardless of how they get to hypothermia, I feel like it's a very sadistic way to have someone go. I mean, you could maybe lock them in a freezer, but then they're just harder to move the body afterward. Flaying someone alive, not really any less sadistic.
Now, there is a lot of history of hypothermia resulting in the death of people, not necessarily intentional, but it contributes to a lot of intentional acts.
So back in the 6th century BC, there was a Persian judge who was accused of accepting bribes, and he was seen as corrupt, and so he was flayed alive and then killed.
I think one of the more famous incidents is the Donner Party of 1846 in the mountains near the California-Nevada border. And it's believed that hypothermia was definitely present, and some have suggested that the brain muddling effects of the hypothermia probably contributed to their decision to resort to cannibalism.
One of the biggest things that we have on record as far as the getting so cold that you feel like you're hot comes in the Dyatlov Pass incident. This was in the Soviet Union in February, which is a great time to go hiking, in 1959. There was a teacher and a bunch of his college students all decided to go hiking, and they all camped for the night. When the search parties found them, most of them didn't have any clothes on. Most of them had died from hypothermia. A couple had died from blunt force trauma or other physical traumas. there's a lot of really weird evidence. So this is one that the cryptozoologists like to glom onto, and there's a lot of different theories about what exactly caused this. But the hypothermia definitely is agreed to have contributed to the running out in the snow with just their pajamas and bare feet and that kind of thing. Because I don't think any of them were in their tents, if I remember correctly, when their bodies were found.
I think there might have been like one or two, but there was evidence that they tried to tear out of their tents from the inside. The final example that we're going to use is actually the Titanic. For those that weren't trapped within the Titanic and drowned, many of the people who died in the sinking of the Titanic actually died as a result of hypothermia because the water was so cold in that region and they sat in it for so long before rescue teams came through that many of them died.
So hypothermia is one that you might use in your stories simply because it's another challenge that cannot be reasoned with. The environments being just so cold. You can't talk it out of being winter. So I would definitely suggest, if you don't quite know how to make your character just a little bit more miserable, coldness is a great way to do it, and the longer they're exposed, the more miserable you can make them. I don't advise trying to be cold in order to experience it. Listening to this episode is a much better plan. So make sure when you sit down to write out these characters that you
write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.